One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. "Mend my life," each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own. This new voice kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save.
In my weekly meeting with Reverend Kate this week, she asked me if I would incorporate something into today's service because she felt that it suited what I'm to speak about today. From Roshani Rhea. There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief which leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. The author Terry Tempest Williams once wrote, "A mosaic is a conversation between what is broken." On Easter Sunday, Reverend Kate gave us each a broken piece of glass, and then she invited everyone to come forward to place that piece of glass, that piece of brokenness, on a piece of wood to create a mosaic together. And the mosaic that we created that day, filled in and grouted by our office administrator, April, has now become a piece of art that we can display here. And even though alone all our broken pieces are just jagged pieces of glass, together our broken pieces become something beautiful. This morning, as we talk about brokenness, I take a moment to present to you our community mosaic and to celebrate the broken, which through community becomes whole. Join me now in a period of prayer and reflection, after which there will be a short silence, and then I will ask you to rise to sing, or no, remain seated, to sing Spirit of Life, first in English and then in Spanish. Today's prayer is 4 short quotes. From Rumi, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." From Ernest Hemingway, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places." From Queen Latifah, "There are times you can't really see or even feel how sweet life can be. Hopefully its mountains will be higher than its valleys are deep. I know things that are broken can be fixed. Take the punch if you have to, hit the canvas, and then get up again. Life is worth it." From Selena Gomez, "If you are broken, you do not have to stay broken." Today's reading is Afterlife, an excerpt from an essay about her husband's death by Joan Didion. Life changes fast. Life changes the instant. You sit down to dinner, and life as you know it ends. the question of self-pity. Those were the first words I wrote after it happened. The computer dating on the Microsoft Word file, notes on change.doc, reads May 20th, 2004, 11:11 p.m. But that would have been a case of my opening the file and reflexively pressing save when I closed it. I had made no changes to that file in May. I had made no changes to that file since I wrote the words in January 2004, a day or two or three after the fact. For a long time, I wrote nothing else. Life changes in the instant, the ordinary instant. At some point, in the interest of remembering what seemed most striking about what had happened, I considered adding those words, the ordinary instant. I saw immediately that there would be no need to add the word ordinary because there would be no forgetting it. The word never left my mind. It was, in fact, the ordinary nature of everything preceding the event that prevented me from truly believing it had happened, absorbing it, incorporating it, getting past it. I recognize now that there was nothing unusual in this. Confronted with sudden disaster, we all focus on how unremarkable the circumstances were in which the unthinkable occurred. The clear blue sky from which the plane fell, the routine errand that ended on the shoulder with the car in flames, the swings where the children were playing as usual when the rattlesnake struck from the ivy. He was on his way home from work, happy, successful, healthy, and then gone, I read in the account of a psychiatric nurse whose husband was killed in a highway accident. In 1966, I happened to interview many people who were living in Honolulu on the morning of December 7th, 1941. Without exception, these people began their accounts of Pearl Harbor by telling me what an ordinary Sunday morning it had been. It was just an ordinary, beautiful September day, people still say when asked to describe the morning in New York when American Airlines 11 and United Airlines 175 got flown into the World Trade Towers. Even the report of the 9/11 Commission opened on this insistently premonitory and yet still dumbstruck narrative note. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, dawned temperate and nearly cloudless in the eastern United States. Broken like fine china, or broken like crude crockery, shattered like glass, split like a log, cracked like a bumper in a car crash, the impact and collapse of wholeness torn asunder and unmade. Life's challenges, sometimes harsh and unexpectedly cruel, stop the flow of our being ourselves and leave us broken up, waiting, wanting, hoping to be healed and made whole once again. At some traumatic times in life, we all become broken. Sometimes through grief and major loss, sometimes through health crises or injury, sometimes through mental health issues or addiction, and sometimes through a broken heart or deep betrayal and disappointment. Once broken, we are never the same again. Our center is lost, and we struggle to balance on broken parts which no longer align or support our being. 12 months and 11 days ago, I went into the hospital to have surgery to fuse my left ankle. The pain that I had been walking in for years had finally become so intense that I was barely able to think and function. Finally, my surgeon told me that if I didn't let him operate, there would not be enough left in my ankle for him to work with. That's how this last year began. The pre-op information was daunting. The surgeon explained the mechanics of breaking the ends off of 2 leg bones and my talus and shaping them to fit together so they could use a kind of cement made of bone and stem cells from my hip, along with 3 large screws to hold the ankle together. His physician's assistant was more graphic. He said, and I quote, "This is going to be really brutal. We're going to take a hammer and chisel and break your bones. There's going to be a lot of blood, but we'll put a tourniquet around your thigh to minimize blood loss. We'll grind a powder out of the bone shards and mix up a cement with your stem cells and glue the bone ends together and use huge screws and drive them through your tibia and fibula into your talus and fuse the ankle into a permanent right angle. You will not have any range of motion in that ankle, and you'll be unable to put any weight on it for months. It will be painful," he continued. "My wife had the surgery last year, and she's still recovering. You'll be in the hospital for a day or 2 and then go home. We'll give you pain meds for the first few days, and then Tylenol will be what we'll recommend that you use to address the pain." Well, that cheered me up. I went from August 15th to December non-weight bearing to slowly weight bearing, doing physical therapy, and on December 4th I was given the okay to walk without a cast, boot, or brace, and without crutches or a cane. December 4th was an ordinary day, and that afternoon I took my dog to the Air Force Base in Truro for a walk and got 20 yards when suddenly I was in excruciating pain. I tried to phone the surgeon's office. The nurse finally returned my calls and those of my physical therapist 7 days later on December 11th and said it was just recovery pain. Finally, after 6 weeks of excruciating pain, my primary doctor sent me in for x-rays, and on January 13th, it turned out that for 6 weeks I had been walking on 2 broken leg bones. The tibia and fibula had both broken 6 weeks earlier, about 1.5 inches above the fused ankle surgery. And so again, I went back to a hospital bed and non-weight bearing, starting all over until June, when I started physical therapy once again. What I'd like to talk about, however, is not the broken bones, but rather that which broken me in so many levels. About what happens when our inner selves experience a trauma. When we break physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. When we are broken in any major way, we lose our center. We are no longer the us we knew. We find ourselves needing to accept the permanent loss of our old self, our old center, and flounder to relate to the new, unfamiliar self that feels uncomfortable and unchosen. It is an experience we naturally resist and often resent. What our heart desires is to be who we were, and yet that is already far behind us and not reclaimable. Without sounding trite, we, like Humpty Dumpty, have broken, and all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put us back together again. Having been broken and having lost our center, we find ourselves helpless and yet needing help. That is such a terrible and terrorizing place to find ourselves when we are shattered and barely recognize ourselves. Now, I realize that asking for help is something we all need to learn to do throughout our lives, but to ask for help when you are in broken pieces and unsure of who you are is far more difficult. What if someone asks, "How are you? What do you need? What are you going to do? How can I help you?" The only truthful answer when we are truly broken and without a center is, I don't know. And revealing that truth when we feel vulnerable, unformed, and unknown even to ourselves takes time and an immense effort of personal courage and trust in life. People do not easily accept an honest and somewhat frustrated, I don't know. The trust we need to find cannot come from outside, however. It must come from inside. We must trust that we will not remain shattered and in pieces forever, but that we will slowly reknit the remaining parts of ourselves together and reshape our broken form, building a new me, and discover or create a new center from which we can function and live. During the first half of my convalescence, I was not really broken. It was elective, and I was able, from my familiar and well-worn center, to organize my life from my hospital bed fairly effectively. I had 5 people to come in the morning to make my breakfast and empty my commode. The AIDS support group brought me lunches 5 days a week with extra for weekends, and members of the meeting house and other friends cooked and delivered my suppers. Friends came in and hung my artwork throughout my new home. Other friends took care of my dog for months. Another friend created a huge, beautifully decorated Christmas tree for me. It was not easy being helpless and needing that much support, but I and everyone who assisted me had known that this was coming, and they signed up willingly. The outpouring of support and assistance was astounding. And as I got closer to walking in November, people no longer needed to help me. The commode was returned, the hospital bed went away, and I began to make my own meals. It had been a time that I was preparing to write about the subjects of kindness, compassion, generosity, and community pulling together to help. But when my leg bones broke unexpectedly and no one believed the pain, the quiet horror, the unwitnessed unraveling of my grip on who I was and what I was going to need to do to survive, I stopped thinking about writing and stopped thinking entirely, except in the most mechanical way. I felt that I had walked into a nightmare episode of The Twilight Zone, and for 2 weeks after they put a cast on again, I stared at the wall and lost all sense of who I was and why life was continuing. I woke in the morning, and I waited till I could go to sleep the next night. Although I organized the reacquisition of the hospital bed, the commode, food delivery, it was like sleepwalking, functioning, but paying no attention to people and things, and barely having any tracking memory. I could not bring myself to ask the people who had helped during my first convalescence to help again. I was immobile and non-weight-bearing and helpless. And this time, I was truly broken, and it was winter in Provincetown when many snowbirds had already flown south. Friends and medical professionals feared I was slipping into deep depression, but I knew that for me, I was a blank, broken slate. Not thinking, not feeling, barely breathing. And then I began to heal. I watched the snow. I watched the children come home from school and the sunrise and sunset through my windows. I was alone about 94% of the time, so I watched the healing forces of nature rebuild a new me. I was no longer the happy optimist I had known myself to be. I was now a quiet, simple optimist. I was not the older man with advice for my friends' life's challenges. I was now a witness to their struggles and just listened. I was no longer driven to create and change the world. I was now a reticent artist noticing beauty, not documenting it. My new center was forming, and as unfamiliar and feeble as it was, it had its own center of gravity, and my broken pieces were being drawn together to begin the healing process of remaking me. Everything breaks, not just us. Everything heals, though healing is slow. You don't need to believe it or trust. It happens. Everything breaks, and everything heals, and the world is never the same because the healing never ends. Blessed be, Amen.